Good afternoon, my international relations peeps. We got a lot to get to. We're talking about the international monetary relations today. This is different than what we talked about last week when we talked about international fiscal relations or financial relations. Those two have to do with what our country does with money inside the country. This section will deal with what money is like between countries. Now, I hope you follow along here. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below or email me, and I'll try to get back to those as soon as possible. Just a few current events. Sadly, Canada suffered its worst mass shooting yesterday, where 16 people were killed. Apparently, the guy was dressed up as a Mountie, a freaking Mountie. I don't think he was riding a horse or anything, but he was dressed up like a Canadian cop, and he killed men, women, and children, even a police officer, nice young lady. So it's really tragic for Canada, America's hat. So if you guys know any Canadians, you might want to reach out to them today. In coronavirus news, this has not been reported on any major network that I know of. I've had to find it through smaller independent sites, but a Nobel laureate by the name of Luc Montagnier, whatever. He is a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize in 2009, I believe, for his work with AIDS and HIV. He's a virologist. He knows about these things. He is saying without a doubt, he believes that this virus, the COVID-19 virus, is a man-made virus, and it was released by China. Very interesting story. It's amazing to me that nobody else has picked this up. And it's been out for a few days now. So I believe this guy, although, I'm going to ask you to question everything, of course. But it's kind of a big story that nobody's talking about. In other coronavirus news, the thing that we're all asking ourselves is, when can we leave our house? When can we talk to other people socially? And it seems like some states are better than others. Apparently Vermont, West Virginia, Montana, they seem to be opening up the soonest, the quickest. If you look here on this map that I found today, it looks like Utah will open June 8th or later. That is nearly 2 months from now. That is a very long time. So I guess just stick with it. I guess I'm in it with you guys. So, we're going to do the best we can. And try to stay safe, try to stay COVID-free. Apparently wear those masks everywhere, and if you don't have one, make one. But that's, June 8th. That's the best news I got for you. That's it. That's what I got. June 8th. Hopefully that gets revised. We are talking today about monetary relations. And to do that, we have to ask ourselves, what is a central bank? Because most all countries in this day and age have a central bank. And what does that mean? What do they do? Well, they control monetary policy. Monetary policy is essentially shifts in the money supply. How much money is being printed into the system? Now, we call this M2. M2 is essentially all the money that's in your pockets, like paper money, but it also includes money that's ones and zeros, like the stuff that's in banks, the stuff that the Fed puts out. And we've seen the Fed put out, the Federal Reserve. When I say Fed, I mean Federal Reserve. When the Federal Reserve puts out money into the system, the questions we have are, we know enough about economics and value to know that when we put out more money, the value decreases. The Fed also controls the interest rates in that money, and that's one of their main tools. However, in the U.S. today, the interest rate is near zero, meaning that they don't really have much power anymore to do much in terms of trying to control the amount of inflation that they can, that enters the system. What is money? What is money? Money is, somebody once told me that money is fiction. And I think that's an interesting way of putting it. Money gives us things, it gives us more accessibility, right? The social role of money is interesting. It's the easiest way to determine the merit of our actions. So you do something, you get a certain amount of money. Back in the day, like I'm talking way back in the day, before money, before what we would call money, if you performed an action for somebody, you might get 24 eggs or a lamb. But the question becomes like, what happens when you only do a half day's work? Do they literally chop the lamb in half and give you half the lamb, it became very difficult, right? So money was able to, it allowed us to be able to separate things and create a medium of exchange. Therefore, when you do something, you receive this much, and it was able to be able to pieced up in a lot better ways than cracking a half dozen eggs or cutting a lamb in half. The other role of money is a store of value. It allows us to say that I have this much value, right? And it's so silly to me that we value ourselves based on a little piece of cotton paper. It provides a unit of account. This provides stability, right? Maybe stability. We're starting to see now that maybe fiat money, and we'll get to that, might not be the most stable form of currency that we could make. But we'll get to that in a second. I want to just show you guys one new thing here. With all the COVID stuff going around and the fact that the dollar, the United States dollar, is the unit of value that the rest of the world uses, I found this. This is a concept of a new form of currency for the United States. Our currency, our dollar bills have been getting kind of old, and in a sense, we kind of need something new. And this whole COVID mess might be the way that the government introduces new bills into the system. This is a concept of new money for the United States. I think it looks rather dope. I mean, if you look at it, it's plastic, first of all. It's a thin form of plastic that you can bend and put in your wallet and stuff. But it's also layered so that you can see behind it, see through it. You can see that, like, here's the spaceman and Kennedy, and you can see part of the spaceman behind him. But they did a very cool way. Like, they were hiding certain things, right? So you can see the Statue of Liberty, and you can kind of see, there's Abraham Lincoln behind him. It's a neat new form of currency. You can see how the light shines from the Liberty Bell, and it's neat. I think it's pretty cool. I just thought I would introduce this to you guys. I have to talk to you guys about exchange rate regimes. I gotta, right? There are typically two types of exchange rate regimes. The first one is called a floating exchange rate regimes. Now, this is essentially the fiat dollar. It floats, and the value of this currency changes over time, dependent upon people's own beliefs and its price relative to other currencies. If we believe that our dollar is strong, then typically we can buy a lot with it. There's another form of exchange rate regime called the pegged regime. Now, this value is set by central banks. Most every country has one, and the central bank will typically tie that money, typically, to the United States dollar or to gold. That's another form of pegging the currency. Now, that means that their currency relies upon our currency. And if our currency goes weak, then their currency goes weak. El Salvador and Ecuador did this. They just basically said, you know what? We don't even want a currency. We'll use the American dollar. And so right now, in the country of El Salvador and Ecuador, the American dollar is the currency. They call this dollarization. And I think it's an interesting thing. You are talking about countries using our form of currency for theirs. Now, who favors these? Like, which countries favor one over the other? Well, investors, borrowers, countries concerned with inflation, they tend to favor fixed or pegged rates. Now, fixed means pegged, right? So countries that prefer fixed or pegged rates, you're talking about investors and borrowers, they love that stability. But countries concerned with inflation, Germany being one of them, and why, right? Why does Germany care about inflation? Well, all of it had to do with World War I. After the Versailles Treaty in 1921, the mark, it was called the German mark, was 18,000 marks for every $1. But you can see how through the year, the currency reached unbelievable amounts of hyperinflation. And when you have this kind of hyperinflation, you are literally talking about taking wheelbarrows to the store to get a loaf of bread, to get a tomato. And we've talked about this before, hyperinflation. So yes, Germany is very, very keen to hyperinflation. And I think this note here on the bottom says a lot. The U.S. Federal Reserve does nothing to stop what Germany was going through. As a matter of fact, you can see here in 1923, German kids are making kites out of German marks. And that's how worthless the money had become. And so what happens next is there's a guy, and he ends up being pretty popular because what he's saying is, I'm going to change all of our currency. It's going to be called labor treasury certificates. Throw away your marks. I'm going to give you a new currency, and it's going to be free from the debt that other countries have put on us, thus no inflation. It's an inflation-free currency. Guess how popular this was in Germany? Extremely. And guess what? They voted the man into office. This is just an example of how you can take something like inflation and you can let one of the most evil men that's ever walked this earth come into power. When you control the inflation and you control the currency and you can make people feel safe again from hyperinflation, these people will become extremely popular. And we don't know what they're going to do. And thus, it's a little bit of a scary time because we don't even know what our own inflation will be. And we don't know who the next leader will be like. We're going to change everything. We're going to bring it back to that new plastic money, and it's going to have a new value, and it's going to be inflation free. But we learned our lessons, right? After World War II, we actually did something to stop inflation. We used the Marshall Plan, and we rebuilt Germany and Japan. We didn't just let them flounder because we all saw what happened after World War I. When we let Germany flounder in their own inflation, they took it out on us. Hitler made them believe that we were the bad guys for letting that happen to them. And that essentially sparked another world war some 20 years later. Now, who favors floating rates? You know who favors floating rates. It's us. The U.S. We favor floating rates. Now, I think this is important, and I have a couple minutes here, so I'm just gonna elaborate on this just a little bit. There is a large movement out there that says that we should end the Fed. Now, ending the Fed is an interesting idea. I'm not for or against it. I still have my, I'm still up in the air about it. But here's the thing I do know about the Fed. The Fed creates a fiat dollar. Now, if you remember what we talked about in earlier lectures, fiat means fake. It has no value behind the currency. The only value that currency has is your belief that it's actually worth something. Now, there's an interesting thing about fiat currency, right? Fiat currency is essentially debt. Keep in mind, the Federal Reserve is the only institution in this country that can create dollars out of thin air, right? But they essentially lend the dollars that they create to us, the Americans, right? So check this out, right? They create new money, right? And we'll call this new money P, okay? Now, this new money will be less than this, right? This is the P that they just created, but they add an extra element, something called interest, right? So they will let us borrow the new money they create plus an interest rate. How can you ever pay back anything if, in order to create the new money, it adds interest? So no matter what, the more money you take out, the more interest you put back. Now, you can't create money, so you can't overtop that interest. Therefore, in a sense, every single dollar bill in this country will never be fully replaced because of the interest value put in it. It is essentially a debt slavery system. Now, that being said, it has worked out for us thus far. But every country that has ever tried this throughout the history of time has collapsed. We cannot keep printing money and expect to live forever under this system. We will eventually run out of time. We will not be able to pay back the exact amount that the Fed lets us borrow because of the interest that they tack on to every dollar being created. Interesting stuff. We'll come back on Wednesday and I'll talk more about the different monetary regimes that we've had throughout time. I hope you guys find this interesting. I know I sure do. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Make sure that you check out the Canvas page. I've made some changes to the paper. The explanation for the Model UN paper is up. Get that back. I've also changed the due date a little bit. I moved back a couple days, give you guys some more time. What can I say? I miss you guys. I miss being in class with you guys. So if you guys get the chance, please give me a like, subscribe, leave me a comment. I'm here for you guys, all right? Email me if you need to. See you guys later. Bye.